This week, a Nuclear Hot Seat exclusive. Coverage of the September 1st hearing at the U.S. District Court in Pasadena, California, on the USS Reagan sailors v. TEPCO lawsuit, the right of these sailors to sue Tokyo Electric Power Company for deliberately lying to the public and the U.S. Navy about radiation levels at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant at the exact time the Japanese government was asking for help for victims of the earthquake and tsunami that happened on March 11, 2011. The lawsuit is based upon the sailors' participation in Operation Tomodachi, Tomodachi meaning friends. This is where they provided humanitarian relief after the devastation caused by that earthquake and tsunami. The lawsuit includes claims for illnesses in the sailors, including leukemia, ulcers, gallbladder removals, brain cancer, brain tumors, testicular cancer, dysfunctional uterine bleeding, thyroid illnesses, stomach ailments, and a host of other complaints unusual in such young adults. Illnesses they were not suffering from before their participation in Operation Tomodachi, which exposed them to massive radiation exposure. These injured servicemen and women will require treatment for their deteriorating health, medical monitoring, payment of their medical bills, appropriate health monitoring for their children, and monitoring for possible radiation-induced genetic mutations. 7 plaintiffs in this case have already died since the legal fight began. Attorneys for the sailors say that additional plaintiffs are continually coming forward. There were 4,500 sailors on the USS Reagan who participated directly in the humanitarian aid issue, and up to 75,000 U.S. citizens in Japan who were potentially affected by the radiation and will be able to join the class action suit. At issue in the hearing on September 1st is where the lawsuit may proceed, a much more important point than may initially appear. TEPCO's attorneys have been arguing that any lawsuit must be pursued in Japan. But TEPCO is a multi-billion-dollar for-profit corporation. These sailors are on their own. And given the expense of these already ill individuals to have to shoulder the expense of flying to Japan, bringing their doctors and other experts to Japan to give testimony is cost prohibitive. And a decision to hold the lawsuit in Japan would essentially stop all possible recourse for the sailors. I have to admit that the rabbit hole of the law is sometimes hard to follow for those of us on the outside, and it did get technical. Could you boil down the points the other side is trying to make and why they don't hold water as far as you are concerned?
The first argument being made is that we should defer to Japan, even though these sailors were in U.S. territory, they were on U.S. aircraft carriers, and most of them never set foot on the country of Japan. And because a framework has been set up in order to compensate people in Japan, the notion is that they could somehow avail themselves of that system. And that's really a stretch, because they've had radiation exposure. They're suffering the consequences of radiation exposure. And to ask them to go back to Japan and give up their treatment regimen in the United States here, where they're getting care to the extent that it is being afforded to them, is really kind of adding insult to injury. It's a question of human dignity and the respect for human life. And these people should have the same rights, in our estimation, as any other U.S. citizen would have who was injured through the fault of another entity, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, for profit, that was operating in a way that did not comport as reasonably would be anticipated under the law.
In attendance at the hearing were 3 sailors from out of town who had been on the USS Reagan during Operation Tomodachi. First, we hear from William Zeller.
I'm William Zeller, and I served aboard the USS Ronald Reagan from 2011 till 2015. I was on board during the Operation Tamagotchi, and I was a communications specialist for the ship. We definitely experience a lot of different things and things that are traumatizing to us as individuals, and the things that we will actually come to see in the future as far as the assistance, the help, and anything that we will receive in, I don't want to say compensation, but in a way to help us proceed further with our lives, with the medical experiences we've had. That is what we really look forward to.
What kind of difficulties have you experienced since Fukushima?
I've had bone deformations, I've had muscle deterioration, I've had personal problems that I don't really care to go into right now, but I also have had friends that have had problems with their pregnancies and having birth defects. I had a friend recently lose their 6-month-old daughter. I've personally seen like the cancers, the tumors, and things that have come from it. Well, I can't say come from, they have been proclaimed from coming from it. And I really just want to see the friends of mine get the medical help and treatment that they can, whereas not even the military can correctly diagnose what's the problem with them. They're having to get different diagnoses such as IBS, which is kind of a catch-all. So the situations that we see, we're not getting professional care with the standards that we need to see the doctors, and unfortunately that does take money. We're only trained to a certain expertise and level to assist us, and then we are outsourced to specialists. And the specialists, we need to pay out of our own pockets for those.
Next, I spoke with intelligence specialist Krish Shamel. What were you doing? How were you impacted when you first began the humanitarian aid mission?
Well, with the intel section, we were actually locating people that needed assistance, whether it was clothing or food, and we were plotting where they were located so our pilots could go and drop off life-saving equipment. So I was in charge of tracking all that.
Incredible job. How did you become aware of the radiation problem, and what were your thoughts when you did?
I had just flown on. I just transferred to the Reagan on the 28th of February, so this was, as soon as I got there, the tsunami happened, and my heart dropped. I have 4 kids, so that's all I was thinking of is, what are we going to be exposed to? Just because who knows what the government actually tells us is accurate or not. It's how, I'm skeptical in that sense. I was worried. I was worried about my family, my wife.
What, if any, health impact have you had in the 5 years since then?
I've had some growths that I've had taken care of. I do definitely have the irritable bowel, and then I've had a couple other issues that I was actually medically retired from the Navy almost 2 years ago because of issues that I don't want to say acquired, but what's the good word I'm looking for?
Influenced by? Causal?
Something like that. That works.
So with your retirement from the Navy, what is your status now in terms of health care? Are you taken care of by the VA? Do you have to go to specialists? Is this on your own dime?
I use VA. I'm 100% covered, so I could use both VA and TRICARE. It's work. It's a lot of work to try to get referrals and appointments. I think I set up 3 appointments last week, and they're not till October, November time frame. And then once the appointments typically do come up, I usually get a call a day or two before saying that they were canceled, the doctor's going to be out of town. So it's always one thing after another. You go there and you actually don't see the specialist that you were hoping to see. I'm not satisfied with the health care, but that's, once again, VA, you get what you pay for. It's free.
Our tax dollars at work, actually.
I honestly don't really think about it that much. I joke about it sometimes, which isn't funny, but it's more of a sarcasm, saying that they actually wouldn't take care of us.
Chad Holt came the greatest distance to witness the hearing.
I actually flew out from San Antonio, Texas. I'm interested in the case because I'd like to see how it goes. But how it goes, it's really up to the judges in there. Either way it goes, I'd like to see help for all the sailors that are suffering and having problems.
What was your experience during the humanitarian mission when you were on board the ship?
We tried to do everything we could as far as doing our regular jobs, and then going above and beyond. We had to do door watches, make sure people didn't go outside to radiated areas. We had to give out equipment for the people to actually use in those areas as well.
How soon after you got there did you actually find out there was radiation and start with the protective measures?
As soon as they came over the announcements announcing that don't take showers, don't drink the water, that's when we found out. Both me and Zeller were actually in the showers at the time.
And how long after you actually got there and began the humanitarian issue did you hear this announcement?
I believe it was about a day, wasn't it? Second day.
What has been the impact on your health in the time since then?
Well, pain, abdominal, chest pains. Also, I have digestive issues. I don't want to go into too much details, but yeah, that's what I've been having trouble with. My doctor diagnosed with IBS, and he told me flat out that IBS is a catch-all because they don't know what's wrong with me.
USS Reagan sailor and Operation Tomodachi survivor Chad Holt. As attorney Paul Garner said at the start of our post-hearing interview,
thank you for coming here today to follow the plight of these sailors who appeared to give humanitarian aid to the people of Japan and find themselves now in a situation where their health has been jeopardized, where their lives are at risk. And we want to thank you for your continued interest in helping them.
I don't consider covering this case or any of the others on this show as an option. It's a moral obligation and one that I do gladly. Here's today's final thought. USS Reagan sailors v. TEPCO. Talk about your David and Goliath battle. This is it. Everyone is weighing in against the sailors, a billion-dollar for-profit corporation. Even the Koch brothers, through one of their so-called neutral, put that in quotes, think tanks, putting forth an admiralty report that just copies point for point everything the TEPCO attorney's brief said, while making it sound like it's coming from an outside authority. Isn't that just like the Koch brothers? You know, this is a major international case. As you just heard, every branch of government knows about what's happening, up to and including President Obama, Vice President Biden, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Homeland Security, the Attorney General's office, the Solicitor General's office, and a Washington conference room filled to the brim with at least 25 to 30 lawyers, hearing why our 3 attorneys say it's appropriate and prudent for the court case to proceed in U.S. courts. And no one from the U.S. is telling them to stop. So it's okay to proceed. Only the obstructionist tactics of TEPCO and their attorneys are standing in their way, slowing down the process, letting the ravages of radiation take out the sailors one by one. And those sailors are getting sick and sicker. 7 have already died. Most are being diagnosed by the Veterans Administration as having IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, which the VA admits is a catch-all for the actual diagnosis, which is, we don't have a clue. So perhaps IBS really stands for institutional BS. But the answer is right there in front of them. Radiation poisoning and the impact of radionuclides on human bodies. And the source? Fukushima Daiichi, and the radiation plume that our sailors weren't warned about until it was too late.